that something happened after the 2010 Constitution. Something happened in this country after Mwai Kibaki left power. And that something was an enslavery that has been put on us, a chain that will be with us for the next 60 years unless we cut it off. This life that we're living, this agony that Kenyans have got economically will not change unless we cut off this chain that was then added to us after we got our political rights. After we attained our political rights, a regime deliberately enslaved us with a chain which is so phenomenal. And we've been trying to tell people what this chain is for the last 2 years or so. Fortunately, we are now seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, but we still have a long way to go in terms of education. This chain is a chain called debt. A new thing was created that has never been there before. This is not ordinary debt. It is not the debt of a man called President Moi. It is not the debt of Mwai Kibaki. It is a new kind of chain, one that has enslaved us, and you need to understand it. And unless we understand it, and unless we are clear about what we are to do, we can remove Ruto today, the problem will still be there. We will still be asking what happened. And when if we start asking what happened, we'll be asking ourselves, my God, have we no hope in this country? And that's when you see a country literally become a banana republic, because the populace lose all hope in anything called leadership. What happened is that in 2013, 2014, the regime of Uhuruto decided that they are economically going to enslave us for generations to come. They decided that the new constitution and its financial laws do not work for them. It does not work for the enslavement of Kenyans. It is going to emancipate us. It is going to liberate us. It is going to enlighten us. It is going to create a new kind of politics in this country that is about ideology. Those of you who are in the diaspora understand ideological politics. It is the one premised on whether you're left or right, whether you're Democrat or you're Republican, whether you're liberal or conservative. It is ideological. And a lot of the basis is economic, whether you're socialist or you're capitalist. It's normally the foundation. What is your economic model? And what happened about 12 years ago is that the new constitution embedded our social and economic rights that became a mandate of a government to perform. And the only way you're going to stop that mandate is to make sure that there's no money in the coffers of government. There is normal debt and there is abnormal debt. What was created here was debt that never came to build anything. Didn't build a bridge, a borehole, a road, nothing. This was debt that entered people's stomachs and we are paying for it. It's like somebody taking a loan in your name and it's your security, your salary that pays it, and they're the ones enjoying all the benefit, and they have taken off and nobody can touch them. This is what happened 12 years ago. It was a systematic scheme to enslave Kenyans, and this current president was deeply embedded in it. Deeply embedded in it. I even believe he may have been the bigger architect of it. I did the MOU for the two of them. I believed that supporting Uhuruto in 2013 was going to be a change for this country. We had a new constitution. I believed that we were going to deal with the scourge and the monster of tribalism. We were bringing two warring tribes that had just fought so viciously just a few years ago in 2007. Together, we're creating peace. And we had this great belief that if the two communities are not killing each other, there's no fight, because those two communities have fought from the Moi era. A government of Moi that instigated clashes against the community of Kikuyus that lived in the Rift Valley. we strongly believed we were going to bury tribalism with that. It had brought out the worst of us in 2007. And we believed categorically that this, and I was not alone, many of us believed in it, that this was going to be one clear solution so we can put it aside, create a new governance platform with a new constitution, and also a new generation in power. Kibaki were the age of our fathers. So this was a new generation into power who had new education, had different thinking, different exposure, a time to bring in ideological politics and to bring out the emancipation economically of Kenyans. I believe my generation was going to do it. And I was confident. My good friend Uhuru Kenyatta, I grew up with him from when we were in high school. We had similar upbringing. We knew the world. We had exposure. We were certain that this was going to be the time that this country was going to change dramatically. We believed William Ruto had the simplicity of a humble background that we did not have, that he would bring the debate of those that we may not be seeing on the table and make sure that we create a new template for Kenya. And I say categorically on this show that I was instrumental in bringing them. I accept that, and I've accepted it since. It did not take long. And I can tell you, we were very clear. One of the things we used to do when we sat together, and we did so very often, whether in my home or in their homes, is that we had a prayer. And the prayer began this way, that if Kenyans save them, they shall save the country. And if they do not save the country shall get rid of them. It was premised on repentance. They did not repent. And I can tell you, we fell out within months because people decided they are not going to repent. They decided that Kenya is going to be their kingdom, their territory, and they are going to make sure that people are downtrodden. And they started something that was most frightening. Most frightening. We had the first Eurobond, and I'll start there. $2 billion Eurobond that was purchased from all over the world through a facilitating bank called JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan Chase were the ones that got a lot of capital put together and raised the first $2 billion. This money was so called to be used at a lower interest rate. At the time, it was just under 6% interest rate. So that now, as was argued by the government, so that now they do not borrow locally from our domestic market to sustain any shortfalls in the budget deficit. And this was argued publicly, stated publicly by the president at the time. Little did some of us know that it was purely a heist. Our laws are very clear. Our new constitution is very clear. Our Public Finance Management Act is very clear. The first thing it says is that all monies must be deposited in the consolidated account, which is the account in the central bank, which is called exchequer account. All monies that are to be received by any party, whether it is a loan, whether it is tax revenue, must go to the consolidated account. That is the first thing. Number two, in the PFM, it is categorical that all monies that are borrowed must be for development. We are not allowed to borrow any money for recurrent expenditure. So when the president was saying that he is borrowing the Eurobond money to starve off our domestic borrowing, he should have implied that this is going towards projects. In fact, if you look at the prospectus that JP Morgan Chase pushed out to the world, it was to go for development. They listed a letter from the then CS Finance, Rotich, talking about the various projects that Kenyan government needs funded for this, for the good of this nation. They had very many infrastructure projects to environment projects to all sorts of things. That is on the prospectus. What they didn't tell you, and they didn't think that any of us would ever bother telling you, is that any item that is funded on debt, any item that is funded without taxes, is in the budget of Kenya. It is stately in the budget, and a vote head is created. So much money is coming towards this project, it is passed in the budget. This prospectus went out in March 2014. There was no budget that this was funding. There was nothing in the line items of the budget that had been passed in the previous June that had anything to do with any Eurobond funding or even any domestic debt funding. It was not there. And then they decided that once they do this, they are not going to borrow locally. It is a man called Jacob Juma who came up to me a few months later and told me, Jimmy, something is wrong here. They have still borrowed domestically, and at the same time, we cannot find in the finance books what are called quarter reports from the Ministry of from the Treasury. We cannot find this Eurobond, what it has done, and we decided to raise some questions. Now, I must tell you, a lot of people at the time the Eurobond was being taken advised against it and said this is borrowing for consumption. It is illegal, it should not be done, even within the Treasury and within the central bank. But the two of them, with the Minister of Finance called Rotich, said rubbish, they are going to go ahead and do it. When we investigated, unfortunately, they gave us the documents because we created a lot of noise about it. We found, yes, sure enough, $2 billion was raised by JP Morgan Chase. And it was banked at JP Morgan Chase. What we didn't know then, but we got to understand much later, was that an account had been opened at JP Morgan Chase. And that account was called Sovereign Wealth Fund Kenya. Sovereign Wealth Fund Kenya. And the two signatories were the Bernard Ndungu, who is the accountant general, and his deputy of the Treasury. They opened an account, JP Morgan Chase in New York, where those funds were received. And they were the two signatories. And they were the ones to decide where it goes. Remember, the law is very, very clear. You cannot receive money other than in the account of consolidated fund. That account is Article 206 of the Constitution, and it reads like this. There is established the consolidated fund into which is paid all money raised or received by and on behalf of the national government, except money that A, is reasonably excluded from the fund by an act of parliament. That is, for example, the Petroleum Levy Fund or the Housing Fund, which they recently created, an act of parliament. And two, may, under an act of parliament, be retained by a state organ that received it for the purpose of defraying the expenses of the state organ, if this is called A&E. All right? But remember, again, under an act of parliament. A and B are the only exceptions that money does not enter the consolidated fund, which is based at the central bank. Now, when we said how was this money being received in New York, and how are these people the ones who are distributing it? So we asked for this distribution. Show us that this money was transferred to Central Bank of Kenya, consolidated fund. What we found is that $650 million went to Standard Chartered Bank to pay a loan on behalf of what was called a syndicated loan that Mwai Kibaki took of 650 of Barclays Bank, but through Standard Chartered. That they showed us a SWIFT. It was directly from New York out that way. The second one of 350, they showed us a SWIFT from New York right to the consolidated fund. So we said, okay, that accounts for $1 billion. Can you kindly show us where the other $1 billion go? This was now done in May 2014. We asked, where is the other $1 billion? When we asked that, we were shown documents. Rotich put them out on the internet. And he said, we have documents here that show you that this bond was so good that we did tap sales of $850 million. Those tap sales were done in December by Citibank, London, and he showed us a transfer from Citibank, London to Consolidated Fund of $850 million. A SWIFT transfer was also shown, right? And it was direct, Citibank, London, direct to Consolidated Fund. We said, that's very good. Now you're showing us another 850, sawa. But the original 2 billion, there's 1 billion we have not seen, dollars. He said, oh, that JP Morgan hung on to until September 2014 and transferred to us. We said, please, we want to see the transfer SWIFT like you have shown us with all the others. They indeed publicized the SWIFT, but that SWIFT was redacted. It did not show us where the money went. And that is where, helter-skelter, we hit the roof. We hit the roof. Where is that $1 billion? And that became the subject under which has not been concluded today. That money did not enter the consolidated fund. And any report you read, whether it was from Edward Auko to what, you start seeing all sorts of funny reasoning as to why. Now we asked, how is this money going all over the place? It's not in its consolidated account, so the Auditor General cannot see it. The Controller of Budget does not approve its removal. What is all this nonsense? Only for us to find that indeed in March 2014, when they were going out for the Eurobond, Honorable Duale, who was then the majority leader, had taken an amendment to the Public Finance Management Act, and he called it an Amendment to Public Finance Management Act 2014. This amendment was an amendment of the Constitution through an Act of Parliament. And what it did, if you remember my reading of Article 206, it had two exceptions to when money does not enter the consolidated fund, A and B. They added C and D in PFM, because in PFM, it was copy-pasted as per the Constitution, Article 206, and pasted. Now they amended it and added C and D in an Act of Parliament to show you how a criminal operates. It was deliberate. And C and D go like this. C, disbursed directly to the suppliers where the loan, in other words, exception to entering the consolidated fund, disbursed directly to the suppliers where the loan is a government-to-government loan and is raised for the purpose of financing goods and services provided by a supplier outside Kenya to do with the loans. D, in the case of an external loan or external government security applied in part to pay at closing pre-negotiated expenses associated solely with exhaustively with the borrowing, including but not limited to the fees, commissions, expenses of lenders, financial arrangers, managers, book runners, fiscal agents, trustees, paying agents, exchange, information agents, syndicate agents, counsel, clearing agents, listing agents, stock exchange, rating agencies, and other expenses of a similar nature arising from an external loan or external government security. They amended the constitution through an act of parliament and added C&D, which has nothing else to do but to do with loans. It is amazing that the Attorney General at the time, Githu Muigai, approved this criminality, because any amendment to any act must go through the AG, it must go through cabinet, and from cabinet it goes to parliament. They deliberately created criminality in order to create our enslavement. The $1 billion was just the beginning of a heist. It whet their appetite. And let me articulate as quickly as I can what their appetite became. What you look at is what had happened, what you call a primary account. What are the accounts of government? What are the expenses? And what are the revenues? So we bothered to look and do the numbers from 2013 all the way to 2023. We said, let us do some numbers. And I hope, Hillary, you have a pen. Please note down these numbers. It simply goes this way. We looked at all the expenses. What was development in the budget? It was 6 trillion for those 10 years. What were the county expenses? What were the salaries? What were the pensions? What were the operations of government? In other words, police, petrol, and so on, travel, etc. What were those expenses? What did they come to? And my good numbers people did a figure, and it came to exactly 16.4 trillion. I said, higher, sawa, that seems okay. Now, what were the revenues? We looked at KRA, we looked at what the government had stated, what central bank was stated, and we came down to a figure of 13.3 trillion. If you look at the numbers, you see the difference. It's 1 trillion something. 1.2, 1.3 trillion was the difference. Now, that is a shortfall for 10 years. That's the budget deficit. That is all that we required. But what did we borrow? We borrowed a total of 7.7 trillion in the same 10 years. 6.4 or so trillion of what we did not need is not on any budget line. It did not enter the consolidated fund. It financed nothing. Nothing. And just to shock you, more, what did we pay towards the payment of debt? In those 10 years, up to the time Uhuru left, we had paid 5.6. And then in the first financial year of William Samoei Ruto, we paid another 1.4. You can see categorically that is 7 trillion we paid towards this debt. And as we look at 7 trillion payment, what is our outstanding debt? 11 trillion. What is this thing? What is this monster that doesn't go away? This monster that up until today, I can tell you, I've just done some figures on the December accounts here of the statement of actual revenues and expenditure. It has accounted for, in December, 77% of our tax revenue went towards the payment of debt. In November, it was 78. Our taxes are going 70% plus towards nothing else but the payment of this debt. It never ends. These numbers never come down. And more of our taxes, 70 shillings of every 100 plus, is going towards it. If you do not deal with this, you will never deal with it. 1.3 trillion was for 10 years. If they took 6.4 above, That is a deficit for the next 60 years they took in advance. All right? 10 years is one. So 6.4 is 10 years, is 60 years that they've taken in advance, that will keep compounding and eating us and eating us and eating us. Every time we produce, anytime we work, anytime we do anything, we are paying 70% of the taxes that we are contributing towards this monster.